Okay, welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, glad you could join us.
So you've sent us your sources, and we're here to really dig in, pull out the important bits so you can, get the core of it quickly.
That's the plan. Today we're looking at a YouTube transcript tracing the Al Saud family history.
Right, focusing on the relationships with the U.S., Israel, Iran, basically from the end of World War II up to now.
And our mission, really, is to give you that solid understanding without, drowning you in every single detail. We'll guide you through it.
Highlighting the key moments, the key figures that shaped modern Saudi Arabia, because its role in global politics is just undeniable.
Absolutely central. We'll stick to what really matters and why it's still relevant today.
Okay, so this deep dive, it's really anchored in that YouTube transcript. It takes a chronological approach, starting with Abdul Aziz.
The founder. Ruled from 1902 to 1953. An incredibly long and foundational reign.
Yeah, the transcript mentions widespread mourning when he died. And just think, his sons have been leading the country ever since. Right up to 2025, that longevity, it's pretty remarkable.
It really is. And you got to consider the context, right? The end of World War II.
Big shift.
Huge shift.
Yeah.
British power declining, the U.S. rising,
Yeah.
becoming the major player in places like Saudi Arabia. That's key to understanding everything that follows.
It wasn't happening in a vacuum, for sure. And even before the U.S. was the main player, the transcript notes Saudi Arabia was getting attention because of oil.
Oh, yeah. Germany, Italy, they were interested. Hitler even supposedly offered Abdul Aziz leadership of the whole Arab world.
Wow. Imagine if that had gone differently.
It really highlights the value of the region even before they knew the full extent of the oil. And don't forget the Ottoman Empire breaking up earlier.
Right. That created this huge upheaval, new nations trying to form, challenges everywhere. Abdul Aziz was navigating all that.
He really was. And his own rise, it's quite the story. 3 campaigns, swords involved.
Sounds dramatic.
And that alliance with the British in World War I, crucial.
Totally. That partnership helped him defeat Hussein Sharif of Makkah, end that long Hashemite rule, and, become the ruler of a unified Saudi Arabia.
It shows how these big shifts happen, often building on these alliances and, moments of opportunity.
And a key piece of his power base, going way back to the 18th century, was the alliance with the Wahhabis.
Yeah, the transcript uses this interesting analogy. The Wahhabis provided the strict religious ideology, the software.
Right.
And the Al Saud provided the political and military power, the hardware.
That's a good way to put it. Software and hardware. A powerful combo for getting started.
Definitely. But let's dig into that software idea a bit.
Okay.
So early on, those very conservative views helped unify things, gave them legitimacy.
But then, as they start dealing with the West wanting to modernize, that software must have caused some compatibility issues.
Exactly. That's the core tension, isn't it? Traditional religious base versus modernization and global engagement. It's a theme throughout their history, like the transcript suggests.
A balancing act. Still happening today, really.
Absolutely. And the transcript makes another interesting point. Oil was found later in Saudi Arabia than in Iran.
Decades later.
Which meant American companies like Aramco got involved first, not the British, who were already set up in Iran with Anglo-Persian.
Huh. So that set the U.S.-Saudi relationship off on a specific track right from the start.
Pretty much. And even though they declared neutrality in World War II...
they let the U.S. build a base in Dhahran.
Which says a lot, right? Even while neutral, they're signaling where their future alliances might lie. They saw the way the wind was blowing.
Definitely a sign of things to come. And that paved the way for more U.S. influence.
Yeah, financial aid. Appointing an ambassador who actually spoke Arabic. It showed the U.S. was serious and the relationship was deepening. More than just oil.
Becoming strategic.
Exactly. Which leads us to that really iconic meeting.
King Abdul Aziz and FDR, Valentine's Day, 1945, on a U.S. ship in the Suez Canal.
Right after Yalta, FDR meets Churchill and Stalin to carve up the post-war world, and then makes time for this 5-hour meeting.
That really tells you how important the U.S. already considered this relationship.
Absolutely. And the agenda, according to the transcript, Saudi sovereignty, the Palestinian issue, and oil.
3 big ones. They apparently reach an agreement on oil access for the U.S.
Which was a huge win for Roosevelt, securing that resource.
But on Israel, big disagreement.
Fundamental disagreement. The transcript quotes Abdul Aziz basically asking, why should the Arabs pay for the Holocaust?
Yeah, suggesting European Christians should provide the land, it really captures that deep-seated opposition right from the beginning.
It wasn't just politics. It was a moral stance for him. And yet, despite that clash, he ruled for another 8 years.
Managed the Wahhabis, set the country on the path to wealth. Quite a legacy.
Which then brings us to his successor, King Saud, 1953 to 64.
Right.
Now, King Saud, the transcript suggests a different kind of reputation, more of a spendthrift, maybe not as popular within the family.
Yeah, there seems to have been some initial uncertainty about whether he could maintain that balance his father had, especially with the Wahhabis. There was even talk of a council overseeing things, maybe pushing his brother Faisal forward.
Faisal, who was seen as more politically savvy.
Exactly. But Abdul Aziz had wanted Saud to succeed him.
So Saud became king, but Faisal was made prime minister for 11 years.
Right. Sort of a built-in check, maybe? Faisal held a lot of the actual executive power.
A division of labor, perhaps.
Yeah.
But Saud's spending and his relationships with the family, the Wahhabis, they were apparently strained.
And his relationship with Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt was also tricky.
Ah, Nasser. The secular pan-Arabist leader advocating for sharing oil wealth? That must have clashed hard with the Saudi monarchy.
Big time. And the transcript implies Saud didn't really handle that challenge effectively.
Which led to what the transcript calls a quiet coup within the family. Saud ended up exiled in Greece.
And King Faisal took over, the third king, regarded as a modernist. Right?
Very much so. Big changes under Faisal. Abolishing slavery in 1962, for instance.
That's significant. The transcript compares it to Iran setting up educational centers around the same time, a period of change across the region.
And Faisal really focused on building the country, hospitals, schools, universities, and internationally, OPEC.
OPEC, that's huge. Getting all those competing oil producers, many in the Middle East, to actually work together.
A rare example of cooperation, as the transcript notes, managing the market for their mutual benefit, recognizing their collective power.
But all this change, all this oil money, foreign influence, it surely created some friction internally with the conservatives.
Oh, definitely. That potential for backlash was always there. Modernization often sparks that.
Meanwhile, the U.S. under LBJ wanted stability between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they saw them as a buffer against the Soviets, despite the underlying rivalry between the two.
Then came the Yom Kippur War, a massive turning point during Faisal's reign.
And his response to U.S. support for Israel. Wow, he coordinated the oil embargo.
Raised prices, cut off supplies to countries backing Israel, including the U.S. A really bold move.
The 1973 oil crisis caused panic in the U.S., the transcript says. It showed Saudi Arabia now had serious global leverage.
Faisal really flexed that muscle, and he wasn't just focused on oil and foreign policy, right? Internal modernization, too.
Yeah, building a proper bureaucracy, council of ministers, an independent judiciary.
But still opposed to ties with Israel, pushing Islamic unity, anti-communist, pro-Palestinian, a clear vision.
A very clear vision.
Yeah.
But again, these modernization efforts created opposition from conservative groups.
Even something like national television.
Right. The transcript mentions Wahhabi opposition to radio, TV, movies, music, images of women, but Faisal pushed it through. He had ways of managing their protests, apparently.
Sounds like a constant tightrope walk. Tragically, his reign ended suddenly.
Assassinated by his nephew during a palace ceremony. A really shocking end.
Which brought King Khalid to the throne, 1975 to 82.
A relatively short reign.
Yeah.
And the transcript paints him as initially less interested in the day-to-day politics, more traditional.
So others stepped up.
Pretty much. Crown Prince Fahd, the prime minister.
Yeah.
They handled a lot of the political work.
But Khalid's reign wasn't quiet. Some major events happened then.
Oh, yeah. Turbulent times. The Iranian Revolution in '79.
Huge.
A major Wahhabi uprising at the Grand Mosque in Mecca, same year.
Wow. At the Grand Mosque itself.
Yes. And growing unrest among Shia Muslims in the eastern province, too.
So internal and regional turmoil. Tell me more about that Grand Mosque seizure.
Well, the transcript links it back to those tribal Wahhabi warriors who helped Abdul Aziz initially.
Okay.
They'd become critical of the government's ties with the West, modernization, that persistent tension.
Right.
This group, a modest movement led by Mohammed, seized the mosque, challenging the al-Saud's legitimacy. The government response was
forceful.
I can imagine. And Shia unrest at the same time. Lots of internal pressure, definitely. And externally, 1979 also saw the Soviets invade Afghanistan.
Ah, yes. And Saudi Arabia, wary of communism, aligned with the U.S.
And heavily backed the Afghan resistance. Money, weapons.
Which, as the transcript points out, had some serious unintended consequences down the road.
Absolutely. The rise of people like Osama bin Laden, a young Saudi who went to fight jihad there.
So the government kind of tolerated, maybe even encouraged, young Saudis going to Afghanistan, seeing it as a way to export extremism.
It seems that way, channel it away from home. But that obviously proved very dangerous later on.
A classic case of blowback. And the Iranian Revolution happening simultaneously. That must have terrified the Saudis.
A Shiite revolution right next door. Huge anxieties about Iranian influence spreading, Shiite populations being stirred up.
Yeah.
It just poured fuel on that existing rivalry.
Intense competition. Which leads us to King Fahd, the fifth king, taking over in 82.
Right. Fahd had been seen as a modernizer when he was crown prince.
But the transcripts suggest maybe a shift when he became king. More appeasement of the Wahhabis.
It raises that question. Did Fed change? Did the internal power balance shift? Or was it just the changing world, the rise of Islamism? It's hard to say for sure.
But his reign saw another boom in oil wealth.
Huge wealth. But that tension persisted. Modernization versus fear of the Wahhabis and Islamists. Fahd publicly committed to ruling by Sharia.
And it was during his time that extremist groups, like the ones bin Laden came from, which formed al-Qaeda, really grew.
Yet what's striking, as the transcript notes, even after 9/11, where 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi, the fundamental U.S.-Saudi relationship held. It didn't collapse.
That really underscores the strength of those underlying strategic interests, oil, regional stability.
Exactly. Fahd's reign also saw the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait.
The first Gulf War. The transcript mentions Saudi Arabia was genuinely scared of Saddam.
Oh, yeah, which led to that huge internal debate. Should they let U.S. troops base themselves in Saudi Arabia to push Saddam back?
A massive decision, allowing non-Muslim troops on Saudi soil.
Huge. They eventually agreed. The U.S. intervened. Saddam retreated from Kuwait. But it infuriated the extremists.
The infidel troops argument. And meanwhile, internally, women were protesting for the right to drive. More signs of pressure for change.
Right. And that relationship with Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, so complex.
They poured billions into supporting Iraq.
Over $20 billion, the transcripts say.
Even though they didn't trust Saddam.
It shows how much they feared Iranian Shia influence more. The enemy of my enemy.
Plus tensions over the Hajj pilgrimage, leaders trading insults. It was hostile.
And it was during Khalid's reign, but with Fahd as crown prince really driving it, that they formed the Gulf Cooperation Council.
The GCC, primarily as a bloc against Iran.
That was the main impetus, yeah.
A
Sunni Arab counterweight. Domestically, Fahd brought in a basic law, like a constitution, and consultative councils.
Some reforms, but his health declined later on.
Yeah, and Crown Prince Abdullah started playing a bigger role.
Which brings us to King Abdullah, the sixth king, another son of Abdul Aziz.
His reign saw efforts to improve ties with the U.S., Saudi Arabia, joining the World Trade Organization.
So continuing that path of modernization and integration, maybe cautiously?
Yeah, the project continued, but maybe stalled a bit. As the transcript hints, challenges remained.
I like that.
Well, the need for more women in public roles, still no woman minister then, and the huge issue of diversifying the economy away from just oil.
Still major challenges today, which leads us to King Salman, the seventh king.
And the last living son of Abdul Aziz to become king. Quite something.
His initial moves involve shaking up the government structure a bit.
Dissolving some bodies Abdullah created, setting up new councils. But the really big story under Salman is his son.
Mohammed bin Salman, MBS.
His rapid rise to crown prince, becoming the de facto ruler from 2017. That's been a massive shift. Really changed the power dynamics in the family.
And his actions have been sweeping and often controversial.
Definitely. The transcript mentions the arrests of princes, seizing assets.
The war in Yemen, where he's defense minister.
The Khashoggi murder, which caused international outrage, and for which he took responsibility as a leader.
But alongside all that, major social reforms.
Huge reforms aimed at opening up society, curbing the religious police, allowing concerts, festivals. Women driving, finally. A big rebranding effort, too. Investments in tech, futuristic cities, trying to project a very different image of Saudi Arabia.
It's a period of really rapid, almost dizzying change. So the kingdom, not even 100 years old yet. 7 kings, the founder, and 6 sons. What a journey.
Immense changes in a relatively short time.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what are the absolute key threads people should take away from this history?
I think 4 main things stand out. First, that relationship with the Wahhabis. It's been foundational, but also a constant source of tension and negotiation. How they manage that going forward is crucial.
Right, the software-hardware dynamic continues.
Second, the Palestinian issue. Consistently important, shaping foreign policy, especially with the U.S. It's evolved, maybe become more pragmatic with talk of a two-state solution, but it's still deeply sensitive.
Especially now. Okay, third.
Third, the U.S. alliance. Nearly a century old now, driven by oil, strategy. It's weathered a lot of storms and remained incredibly significant despite ups and downs.
Enduring, yeah. And fourth.
Iran. The rivalry. It's deep-seated, based on power competition, ideology, Sunni versus Shia. Lots of tension, occasional thaws, but the underlying conflict shapes so much of the region.
Those four themes really weave through the whole story, don't they? Wahhabis, Palestine, U.S., Iran.
They really do. And understanding how they've interacted is key to understanding Saudi Arabia's path. The initial Wahhabi partnership was vital, but later became a constraint on modernization. Palestine has always been there, influencing its regional standing.
And the U.S. relationship, so central, but not always smooth. And Iran, the constant competitor.
Exactly. And now you have these massive reforms under MBS, a potentially huge shift, but, the long-term impact, whether it's sustainable, it's still big questions there.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on.
Right.
We've traced Saudi Arabia's path, mostly aligned with the U.S. gradual modernization, facing internal conservative pressures. Now, think about Iran's path over the same period, revolution, often anti-U.S., a different kind of religious influence. What does that comparison tell you about what really drives change in the Middle East? How much influence do these external alliances versus internal forces, conservative versus progressives, actually have in shaping where these countries end up?
That's a really interesting comparison to make. Lots to think about there. Understanding Saudi Arabia's past, its specific mix of tradition, change, and alliances is definitely crucial for understanding its present and its future role in a very complex world.